Okay. Good morning, everyone. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I'll call the Special Committee of the whole meeting to order. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, then, our first PowerPoint presentation is from the IBI group regarding the Streetscape Master Plan, and that's relative to item number 3. So, Jason, maybe if you could give us an overview and an introduction, please.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today we have Darlene Broderick and Trevor McIntyre with us from IBI Group, and they'll be leading the presentation. I'd also like to introduce Carmen Huey from York Region. Carmen is the Streetscape Program Manager with the region, and she was the project coordinator for the Streetscape Master Plan study. Just by way of a brief background before we begin the presentation, we were last in front of council with this plan about a year ago, and that was in the form of a council workshop. And for those of you who were here at the time, you'll recall that we had provided sort of a summary of the visioning workshop that had actually sort of kicked off the project, and we also provided a high-level overview of the design concepts that were being prepared under the themes of vibrant, active, and green corridors. Not long after the council workshop, we held a public information center to get further input from our residents and business owners on the vision itself and on the high-level design concepts. And since that time, the core project team has been working to refine the vision, working to refine the design concepts and the cross-sections. We've been meeting with internal departments here at the town and at the region, operations, public works, traffic safety, to ensure that not only is the Streetscape Master Plan achievable and feasible, but also to understand the capital, maintenance, and operation costs associated with its implementation. The last thing I'll mention before I turn it over to IBI Group, excuse me, is that in addition to the physical works within the right-of-way that will be done as part of future improvements to Yonge Street and Davis Drive corridors, the Streetscape Master Plan is intended to shape expectations. It'll provide a framework and design direction for development applications along the corridors, similar to what you see with the Viva Rapidway parts of the corridors. And so, as I mentioned, it'll provide design direction for development applications, particularly along Yonge Street North and Davis Drive East, which are the sort of two more urban sections of the master plan study area. So with that, I'll turn it over to Trevor, I believe, is going to take us through the presentation, and I believe the IBI will be available to answer any questions following the presentation.
Go ahead.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Mayor and Deputy Mayor and members of council, and happy Halloween, I guess it's appropriate to say. Thanks for having us here. Sorry?
Because it's Halloween, is that why we have ghosts?
Yeah. But don't be afraid, they're not clowns.
Oh. Bringing this back to a tone of civility.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us. As Jason said, we've been on about a year and a half to 2 year journey through this exercise, and we've had a lot of involvement from many of you, and we thank you for that. And at this point, now as we wrap up, we look forward to making this presentation and answering any questions that you have. Just for as a reminder here, the project context, is focused on Yonge Street and on Davis. The project extents are there, and importantly here was connecting to the parts of Viva that were on the east and on the south of the Yonge and Davis intersection. Just to remind you about the kind of the project objectives. Our objectives were really long-ranging. It was a long-range master plan, and I say that just because, Mr. Mayor, you had At the beginning, as we first met, we talked about some of the things that we would like to try and achieve in the short term, but you reminded us wisely that this is a long-term vision and that parts of this would take many, many years to unfold. So keeping that in mind, we have taken a step back and actually looked at the whole thing in terms of the cost, but in terms of short-term and as well as long-term objectives, and working closely with any developers that might be developing along the corridor. So our objectives were about incorporating key urban design principles, strong design principles, which we'll go through, a bold and unified streetscape for this stretch, a hierarchy of spaces and streetscapes and typologies. And as we talk about the different characteristics of the different parts of the corridor, you'll be reminded of that. And then very key is pedestrian accessibility, the fact that we do want this to be a place that gets people out of their cars and into the businesses and walking and cycling along these parts of this corridor. Develop placemaking opportunities, and often as we have wide streets that don't have a character of their own, we need to look at how we actually unify that, pull it together into a corridor, and then visually tie into Viva next streetscape and the town and Newmarket gateways, and a strong wayfinding strategy for people finding their way through the corridor, encouraging them to stop along the corridor. I won't go into this detail because as you know the corridor very, very well, but the characteristics, as you know, along there are that it's not always the same, that it's very wide and it involves a lot of pavement, and that it's car dominant. I think those are the most important things, and a bit difficult for people to imagine what it would be like in the future to get out of their cars and actually walk pieces of this corridor. So as Jason mentioned, we went through the exercise looking at a number of themes and design themes, and some of them had to do with vibrancy, and some had to do with a green corridor, a more green corridor, and some had to do with active transportation along the corridor. I think in the end we came up with a kind of a hybrid scheme that actually played upon the best of all three of these characteristics, and we fit them into the corridor. We also keep in mind the York Region work on connecting strong, caring, safe communities, and the transportation mission about building roads and actually keeping transportation corridors moving. So the design principles had to do with the architecture, the built form, the placemaking characteristics, with green and environmental sustainability, which is nice to look at, but it's also reducing the strain on our infrastructure in terms of stormwater, for instance. The access and wayfinding, creating a strong identity, and fundamentals of public realm design. Fundamentals being that we are catering to all people with all levels of accessibility and all levels of mobility. And then implementation and maintenance, we don't want to design something which is a burden on long-term maintenance that we can't afford. So as we went through those elements, and you'll see through the design, we actually focused on each of those. We focused on the characteristics. And we've often used the term, and you've heard this term undoubtedly, about complete streets. And so complete streets in our case just means that everything from one building wall to the other building wall and all the real estate in between, which is typically owned by the town or owned by the city and the region, is public space, but it's used by all the people, but it has to be maintained. And so what does that mean? It means that we have to pick the right size pathways and sidewalks and roads and such to allow for what we need today, and we also have to preserve for what we need in the future. So the detail we went into over this last 18 months to 2 years involves the dimensions, and it involves all the characteristics of the places that actually occur in there. If you look up at these slides, you'll see that the Yonge Street corridor is slightly different from the Green streetscape and slightly different from Davis. And really, as we get into it, you'll see that some areas are a little more urban. They might be a little more expensive, and the reason is because of the nature of the businesses along that corridor. However, the characteristics of having active transportation up the corridor is consistent throughout. You'll see renderings like the Halloween rendering, I'll call it there, with the ghosted people. But the idea is that even at an intersection, you have places that actually feel like safe pedestrian places. When a pedestrian's crossing the street, they have a place where there's a bit of refuge if they can't make it across in one cycle because of the speed that they're moving. It's clear lanes for bicycles that are separated from traffic, and clear places that people feel comfortable walking along the corridor, and yet people feel enjoyment as they drive the corridor as well. We went through a lot of detail with the working groups, and some of the key things that you see in the top right here, which are important to remember, are interim condition which protects the median for the future Viva Next BRT. So although we don't have the BRT running up the center of the road right now, you'll see where we have actually preserved a median and preserved the real estate that in the future, should that be extended up, and when that is extended up, we've allowed for it. Planted median with public art, street trees, understory planting, pedestrian amenities, and that means more than just sidewalks. It's also places for them to stop and rest, benches, trash receptacles, lighting. Reduced through lane widths. And we went through an exercise of right sizing. And after we had actually kind of finished the study, we went through an exercise that looked and said, you know, are we actually making the lanes the right size? Or are we making them bigger than they need to be? And we worked very closely with all of your engineers and all of your professionals, looking at what is the right size to make sure that we're not overbuilding for something that we regret in the future. And this is very topical, and other cities, other municipalities are doing this at the same time, because we have different patterns of traffic, we have different size vehicles, and we have things that, big changes that we'll probably see in the next 5 to 10 years and so on. And I missed one, which is very important, which is snow storage. We're not the same as every other study that's out there, because we do have snow here. We have windy conditions. We have places that we have to actually figure out where we're going to actually put the snow on a short-term basis right after a storm, as well as where we can actually store snow. And we have winters where if there isn't that much snow, we see the cyclists riding through the entire winter. And so we cannot just assume that cycle lanes are places you can pile snow and leave them alone, because you're cutting off an important form of transportation. Intersections, we spend a lot of time looking at intersections, and Yonge and Davis, as you see here, that actually shows what the intersection might look like, where the buses or the future BRT may actually end up going, where the cyclists go, how cyclists cross the street, and how those points of refuge are on the medians. Any places along the corridor, like Nokita Trail down towards the south, where there's actually other forms of transportation that tie in, or feeders as we call them, those feeders have to be thought about, and they have to be thought about how people actually get off those feeders and get onto this corridor, and how they move through this corridor. So we spent a lot of time looking at that. And as I said, there were different characteristics. The green streetscape, which is a little less urban than what we saw to the north, and the characteristics are slightly different in terms of the amount of trees, and some of the geometry and some of the location of bike lanes. Davis and Bathurst Street Gateway, anywhere where the important intersections are, you have some challenging opportunities where streets are fairly wide, where you have left turn lanes or double left turn lanes, but you still have to accommodate it and not lose the sense of an important intersection. And so we've gone through the same characteristics on those intersections. So that's the west end. When you get a little closer, the urban streetscape, as you get closer to Yonge on Davis. And again, a combination of kind of green and active corridor as you're coming into the important Yonge and Davis intersection, where things urbanize a little more. And what the typical green streetscape would actually look like. And then Davis Drive, green streetscape, places where there's a little less urbanity, and there's places where you can allow for coordination of planting programs, like having as development occurs along these pieces where you can actually get double rows of trees and such, and we can actually create a more robust kind of green streetscape along the way. And same with Davis East, just as we're meeting the 4-4. Gateways are an important theme because people moving into this corridor have to be kind of welcomed, and so we looked at special characteristics of those gateways, where they locate. In terms of plant material, dealing with salt and salt conditions and winter conditions, we went into the detail of actually looking at the soft plant material, but hardscape we also looked at what are the pavers, how do you maintain them, what's the cost of maintaining them, and the characteristics, and the furniture. On the implementation side, we looked at these 6 kind of categories on the right. So from a policy standpoint, are the policies in place to implement the plan? In terms of development, the public realm enhancements, how do they actually become the catalyst for other development along the corridor? So that becomes part of the partnership that then happens between public and private sector. Coordination with utilities, probably one of the most challenging exercises in actually implementing a plan is how you coordinate with the utility companies, how you work with them, and how they work on the same timeline objectives that you have in terms of implementation. And we found that from projects like Viva, where things may look straightforward, but when it comes to implementation and coordination with utilities can be very challenging. Public art, we all like public art, and we see the opportunities, but how do you pay for it? Do you pay for it through Section 37, or do you pay for it through policies of contributing a certain percentage of your capital construction towards a pool, and then getting the public art in the right place? Capital projects, other capital initiatives that are happening like Viva and like Young North, other future projects that come along the line, how do you coordinate with them and make sure they support the plan and are consistent with the plan? And we also try and keep the plan flexible enough that if something happens 7 years from now that we don't know about, we can adapt the plan in order to work with those planning objectives. And then funding strategies, so where are the funds coming from? Are they coming locally, or is it a partnership between other levels of government, so regional and local? What are the public-private partnerships? Development charges, are there DCs that can contribute to paying for local improvements? Are there TIFs? And green and public art grants. Towards the end of this, we went through an exercise of actually looking at the capital construction. And if you look at the top table, you'll see Yonge Street North, and then South, and then Davis West and East. And you'll see the average cost, which is millions per kilometer. So the most expensive you can see is the 7.4 million per kilometer, which is Yonge Street North. There's about 1.8 kilometers of length there, which results in 13.1 million. The cost drops significantly in terms of Yonge Street South because there's less hardscape, there's less urban tree planting, for instance. So it's less expensive to actually put things in. It's a little less urban, so the cost drops to about 4.4. At 1.7 is about 7.5 million. Davis Drive West, 1.9 kilometers at 4.8, slightly higher because a bit of a hybrid, a blended rate to get the 9.2. And then Davis Drive East, 4.7, it's a very similar number for 2.5 kilometers out to the highway and for 6.9, giving a cost of about 36.5 million. The streetscape cost comparisons we thought would be useful. So if we took our blended rates that you see above there and we applied a blended rate, you'd get in the second column, you'd get a blended rate of 5.3 million per kilometer. And if you wanted to look at a comparison to that, if you look at the streetscape corridor master plan, the South Yonge work that was done previously, the cost of that was about 8.2 million per kilometer. And the Viva Next streetscape that we're very familiar with is about 6.6 million per kilometer. So just to show that we're not putting you out as being overly extravagant. The costs are reasonable and in the same sort of ballpark. Order of magnitude costs on maintenance and operations. Again, as you can expect, the more expensive corridor is more hardscape, so more snow removal and maintenance costs. So the cost is slightly higher, but you end up with a blended cost of about $920,000, or just under $1 million a year. And then average cost on other pieces on a per kilometer basis are in the area of anywhere from 140 to 300. Viva at about 200. At that point, I think we're going to, we have some time to take any questions that you might have. Prior to that, I just say that we have really enjoyed working with you, and we found it to be a fulsome exercise and a very well thought through exercise, which included, I think, the right sizing exercise. We never saw that coming at the beginning, but I think it was a good exercise to go through to make sure you're making the right decisions and to just check it with your technical people. And I think, unless Carmen or Jason have any other comments, or Darlene, I think that's we're open for any questions you might have.
Okay, I have 4 people in the queue. Councillor Vague.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you to the staff. This is it's very exciting. It's contemporary. It's modern. It really changes, and I think brings up to date the public face of Newmarket, particularly in those corridors. So it's exciting. Like everyone else, we look at the cost and you're going, holy smokes, that's a lot to beautify, quite frankly. But but we'll discuss the cost some other time. But I do have a question, and this may be directed to the staff, and it's about the implementation and funding. There was mention of part of the funding or portion of the funding coming from development charges as those corridors are developed. Now, is this something? So my question is, if we rely on that, or at least rely on that as a trigger, I suspect we would end up with very patchwork designs. As developments come online, different parts of even the different sections. So it'll take many years to complete, and it really won't look very good when you start with that patchwork. Is the recommendation that this is something that the town of Newmarket starts, and as development comes on board, we collect additional development charges to pay for that? And also, what have other municipalities done in that case to avoid that patchwork look?
Peter.
I can begin, and then if others want to add anything. So, with respect to funding, there were some slides there that showed a number of different options for funding the work. Development charges would be one such fund, and we look at the next time when we do the background study for development charges for building in some of these costs into the development charge. So that on a go-forward and future basis, development charges could be used to fund this work as it comes forward. As individual developments come forward, those are other opportunities to, on the street frontage, begin to have the developers implement some of those features or take cash in lieu instead of the developers performing that work immediately. And then finally, through capital projects, those are other opportunities in which that can be implemented and incorporated into the budgets of those projects. So, I think the use of development charges is a good one for generating the funds for future streetscape improvements on our corridors, such as this. And I think in answer to your question, that is typically done in other municipalities where you have large streetscape investments in urban intensified areas to help offset the costs of developing these features.
Now, each one of these corridors are regional roads, and so there is a cost sharing with the region, and that's one of the reasons why the region's been very engaged in the process as well. So I think it's 50% of the costs are covered by the region as well, so.
Percent cost share when the work is aligned with a capital project of ours, so such as Yonge Street North. We're working very closely together with the town to ensure that the design actually meets the streetscape master plan requirements. So in the future, the town could come to the region for 50% cost share.
I'm sorry, just a follow-up question to that, and it's great to know that the region is sharing in the cost. So I guess my question was, looking in the future, and perhaps even in the near to mid-future, is this the thinking of the staff then? Is this something that you would recommend that we go forward with, and then as development comes along to recapture some of those costs, or wait until we have the dollars in the bank from development and then start implementing? I'm not sure if that's an area that you've discussed.
Mr. November?
I just want to avoid a patchwork look that some parts are done, some parts are not done, et cetera. So I just want to know our financing strategy going forward would be.
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a very good question, and I think, we similarly want to ensure that we have a strategy for a unified look on the corridors. One of the first projects that will begin to implement this will be the Yonge North corridor, as it undergoes a capital project through the region of York. Through that stretch, there will be a good opportunity to implement a lot of this plan. But as developments come along, we would use this plan as a guiding document for determining how best to implement it. And there may be stretches that we'll be able to implement in one shot, or again, we maybe, as development comes forward, we look at other mechanisms for taking cash in lieu and then developing stretches as it makes sense.
One final question on that, and then I'll let my colleagues speak. I was speaking of development, obviously, on the corridor, but we also have developers contribute to our trail fund, even if they're nowhere near the trail. Would we be looking at the developments that are not on the corridor in our development charges to help contribute to the corridor, just because that benefits them also, the beautification, if you will, of Newmarket? Or are we just looking at developments that are directly impacted?
Mr. November?
Yes, through Mr. Mayor, I would believe that we'd be looking at a general development charge across the town, and then that would fund the work in the corridors. But that would be subject to our background study, and then also how the region is looking at it as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Twinney.
Thank you for the presentation, and gives us a bit more vision of what these areas are going to look like in the future. My question was with regards to Yonge Street North, and obviously I'm assuming, so the costs, from what I heard from you, are quite a bit more than the other areas, and is that more mainly because of the integration of that middle portion of the plantings and that area that goes up the middle? Is that why that's quite a bit more in that area?
Go ahead, Trevor.
It's a combination of things. Maybe the easiest thing, if I go back to one of the initial corridors, it's a combination of things. But if you think about each of these elements, these key design elements that actually occur in there, the intensification of them along the north stretch. Sorry, I missed it here. I'm looking for this here. This is maybe a good place to see. So Yonge Urban Streetscape. Part of it is where you will have more development along the sides. The corridor and where the tree planting is, the urban, I'll call it urban tree planting, there's actually a certain amount of infrastructure that actually has to go into that, to planting those trees. It's not just digging a hole and dropping a tree in. It's actually building part of that boulevard in such a way that there's enough soil that the trees will actually thrive. And so the urban trees are typically a lot more expensive than the areas where you can actually just dig a hole and there's enough earth to support a tree. So that's one example. Some of the finishes are slightly higher because of the nature of that corridor being a more of a commercial corridor. And And I think the other thing, it's important, and it's important even in terms of the earlier councillor's question, is that when you're developing from right-of-way to right-of-way within that corridor, you're laying the table for the development which will happen adjacent to it. And so we're creating a more urban edge so that when you start getting a development there, and there's a restaurant and there's a Starbucks and a market and whatnot, the patios and the plazas of those places are going to tie directly into the outside of the streetscape. So if you look at the top right image and you see the amount of kind of hardscape from building face to building face, there's more of it than there is in, say, the bottom left. And typically it's more expensive than it is to put soft landscape in. So it's a combination of things that add up to that cumulative higher cost.
Okay, and then just to follow up, so you had mentioned about ensuring that that middle portion exists in the future for perhaps if Viva continues on.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my concern would be, we don't have any idea, I guess, of if and when or whatever. And it just, and I'm just wondering, like, are we spending a lot of money on something that maybe 10 years from now is going to get ripped out and replaced with?
That's a very good question.
Right? And
Yeah.
is there
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
ways of doing it so that we are respectful to the taxpayers that are, obviously paying for all this?
Yeah.
That they don't see that because, that's where, that perception, the government of waste and, and
Yeah.
I can just, imagine that to put all that infrastructure in for something like that, which is quite an expensive portion of that
Yeah.
Yonge Street North area,
Yeah.
to have it turn around and, is there other options so that, obviously it's going to look great, no doubt, but I would hate to have it all put in place and then in 10 years from now, it's like, okay, well, Viva Next we've got this coming through, funding's coming through for that,
Yeah.
and now it's going to be ripped out.
Yeah. So what we typically do in a case like this is we actually design it for the Viva Next. Like we design it so that if you look at that rendering that's up on the screen there, you can imagine a running way running down the center that would actually have the Viva Next infrastructure there. If we get the dimensions there right, then we can play with some of the turning lanes, but what we don't want to have to do is move the outside curbs.
Right.
So the trees that are planted, the utilities, the lights, everything on the right and left side of this picture should stay in place. If you see where the bus is on the left and the bus on the right, those buses are basically moving into a central corridor and a more efficient corridor, and you're redoing that central corridor without having to touch anything else. And that's the intent, so that your throwaway costs are minimal. With this group, we talked about not doing anything in the median, and if we were looking at Viva Next 2 years from now, I'd say do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Or plant ornamental grasses or something like
Right.
that, something that you can just pick up and move. Trees are difficult because people get married to trees, and then they don't want to lose those trees. They don't want to lose that character, but that's why we showed public art elements, because a public art element you can rebuild the foundation.
Yeah.
You can pick it up, you can move it, and relocate it at a fairly nominal cost.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. I think that's would be my only concern is that the people to get married to trees, right? So
Yeah.
to put them in and then rip them out is never a good thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how soon Viva will go up to Green Lane, but the initial thoughts, if I'm correct, is that it would be curbside up until Green Lane, and it might be quite an extensive period of time before it goes down the center corridor. So that might be another consideration as well. Okay, thank you. Regional Councillor?
Thanks very much. On that, on the same note, I'll quickly add, because as elected officials, we can say almost anything we want. It's harder for staff, but I just don't think it's even thinkable that you'll be seeing Viva Center Lane and those other areas for at least a decade. And I think it might be a fair bit more than that, but that's at least 10 years. So the public can rest assured that that's still some time off. First of all, I want to say, I think this is, as Councillor Vague said, this is, and I think it's hopefully very reassuring to the public to see the kind of long-range planning that the town and the region are doing together to make, exceptional streets. I want to just also clarify for other people who are maybe viewing this or whatever, we're talking about the non-Viva sections of Yonge and Davis within the boundaries of Newmarket. So the non-Viva sections of Yonge and Davis within Newmarket. And to see it coming to the same standard, or frankly, perhaps arguably a higher standard than even the Viva corridors, I think are going to make Yonge and Davis absolutely spectacular and complete, as you said. So I think it's amazing. The right sizing and the shrinking of the crossing section, the crossing length, the corridors, I think are some great work, and all the greenery. So I'm very excited about it. I participated, as did others, in some of the workshops with the public where they, were really hands-on in providing input and ideas for what this would look like. So there was a great deal of public participation. So I think it's really great stuff. A couple of questions I have is that, so am I to understand from this then that the most imminent portions of this are the Yonge and Bathurst and Yonge and Davis intersection work, right? That's the first that will feel this. And so this has been already feeding into those designs, because those designs clearly have to be done by now. That's already feeding into it, and they'll be able to marry up to this once the work occurs, let's say, north of Davis?
Yes, that's correct. Yonge Street North is going to be very much informed by the Streetscape Master Plan. As for Bathurst and Davis, because we have a double left turn scenario design, it won't realize itself truly in that manner, because what's envisioned in master plan is not a double left turn lane. It'll be more of an urban intersection. But we have worked closely with the town to integrate the town wall feature, as well as some softscape and hardscape in front of the feature at Bathurst and Davis. So it's definitely a great guiding document for us for the intersection. Yonge Street North, as I said, will be a good translation and realization of the plan.
But Yonge and Davis intersection will be done before, Yonge North, I believe, Yonge North is set to commence 2020, is that correct?
Correct.
So Yonge North is going 2020. Yonge Davis intersection will be done before that, right? As part of the Viva work. So it'll already have the marrying version on the north side that will work with the Yonge North corridor as it moves out from there?
I'm sorry, Councillor Taylor, I misunderstood you to say Bathurst and Davis.
Well, I said both, Bathurst,
Okay.
Davis, Yonge Davis.
Okay, so Yonge and Davis, you're talking about the north side of that?
Yes, will it
Yeah.
already start to incorporate this vision moving north?
It will through the Yonge Street North detailed design process.
Oh, through that process.
We're at 60% right now. So what was decided was that Viva would complete the bullnose portion of the Yonge Street north leg.
Back to the plan.
Sorry, if we can go back to the plan. It's okay. There we go.
Yeah.
So the bullnose part in front of the crosswalk, that
Maybe
would be
if
completed
you use
by...
Mouse.
the mouse there, then
Thank
you
you.
can...
So this bullnose piece will be completed by Viva, and that the crosswalk and median portion all the way north and the boulevard elements would be part of our Yonge Street North capital project, so that we aren't experiencing any throwaway costs.
But the width of the boulevard there will all start to reflect this work, like the width of the crosswalks, et cetera,
median?
the way those designs are, that's being incorporated now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks. The couple other questions, if I could. The page, slide 23, I think it is, with the costs. Yeah, Davis Drive. Am I correct here? When you at the top, you go, it's 1.8 kilometers times 7.4 equals 13.1?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest your math on the bottom line is not quite correct. So, budgeting that one out, we might want to make that more like 10 million or plus. Right? Scott, it must be. It's,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So it's, yeah, okay. So it's 10 or probably close to 12 million, no, to 11 million. So, and then just to talk to Councillor Vague's questions here. So the way, so from his questions, I'm trying to, and then what I understand and what I know from regional conversations, et cetera, trying to get a sense of how this works. So first of all, the piecemeal part that he's concerned about, that would only be in relation to what developers are doing as they marry up to the project. So we may hold them before, let's say, a Davis North, or Yonge North, or post Yonge North if they redevelop to do certain designs through the process that meet and marry and match with the streetscape. But the streetscape will not be piecemealed. I mean, Yonge North will be one project, the full length, and it will be completed through regional budgeting. And the portion that we're talking about is is not the full project cost, or is it? And what portion is 50/50? Is it the streetscaping? I mean, when the region does a road project, it's not 50/50 with the town, correct? So can we just clarify that? And sorry, and when you're done clarifying that, can you also speak to how that will potentially change in 2017 as the region adopts full jurisdiction of the boulevards and full cost burden of the boulevards through tax shifting, I assume?
Right. It's a very good question. So with regard to Yonge Street North in particular, the way the region has budgeted for Yonge Street North from a streetscape perspective is based on the Towards Great Regional Street Standard, which we've allocated $4.9 million in terms for streetscaping to the project. So that assumes that there's no involvement or partnership with the town, and that we would build that as is. Now, with this vision, if we want to build what you see before you, what the town can do is apply to the region for partnership funding, and what we can do is cost share on the delta between the Towards Great Regional Streetscape Standard and this vision. So the vision is valued at $13.1 million for just the streetscape. We've budgeted for $4.9 million. So the delta between 13.1 and 4.9 is what the town and region could cost share on. So that works out to, I believe it's 8.2 million is the delta, so that the town could then cost share for 4.1, and then the region could cost share for 4.1 as well.
And just to clarify, that's on the streetscape aspects. That's not on the cost. I mean, the full cost of construction of that road is regional, and it would be much greater.
Yes, and
Right.
the region would have covered for that portion.
And can you also speak to then if that, let's say on the Yonge North portion, potentially $4 million of town cost, does that change under if the region next year assumes full boulevard jurisdiction throughout the region? So the region's looking at right now throughout York Region, assuming jurisdiction from edge to edge of the boulevards of all regional streets to make them more consistent, to make them more transit user-friendly, et cetera, correct?
Correct.
And in the case right now, the town, believe it or not, actually has some responsibilities along there, like I think sidewalks and lighting. Is that right? And the region would be taking that all on. They would put that on the tax base, and we would, possibly and probably take it off the tax base. But that's, I believe, set to occur in 2017, if not in 2018. If that occurs, does this change at all? Do they absorb everything under that theory, or do we continue to have to look at this as more like an upgrade tweaking that we would still have to place upon the changed jurisdiction and the changed?
That's an excellent question. I would love to give you a black and white answer for that right now, but I think subject to the outcomes of the study next year with regard to boulevard jurisdiction, I think what we can safely say at this point is that this vision is the vision, and then whatever the outcome of the boulevard jurisdiction is in terms of the region's standard base is, I think what we can safely say is that if that region base is still going to be under what the vision is, then we'll still have to be cost sharing. If it is going to come up to a level where we take on full boulevard jurisdiction of enhanced streetscaping and even base streetscaping, then that's when we can say that we'll take it all over.
Okay. And I guess then the fact that there's no clear answer isn't necessarily a bad thing, because that provides the opportunity for the town through this process to advocate for the region when assuming full boulevard jurisdiction to do it to the current standard that the various municipalities have set out, and ours is now officially will be set out at a high standard, and hopefully that'll be the standard that's assumed. And the last thing I just want to say is, while these are larger costs, again, they're cost shared at a minimum, perhaps fully taken on by the region through the boulevard jurisdiction redistribution. The other thing I'd point out is that these projects are very far apart in timelines, right? So Davis Drive East, having just had some work done to it before it ever envisions that this next phase of work is some time off. And so these are costs that are spread over a long, long period of time, and the DC collection would occur in that period of time, et cetera. Yeah, but my comments, I think this is, the kind of planning residents look to. This is anticipating the urbanization of these corridors. When you think of this work in conjunction with our secondary plan and the fine grid network it creates and the standards it creates, I think this is really put forward a fantastic vision for Newmarket's major corridors that will help them continue to stand out and be an example. So thanks very much. I think it's fantastic work.
Thank you. Councillor Quapis.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I love seeing the fact that we're looking long-term and making sure that it's coordinated with future plans with everyone else to ensure that we're not wasting taxpayers' money. My question is, if we can go on slide 8, I just need a little bit of a clarification. I noticed that on that slide, specifically when it comes to Davis Drive, east-west corridor, I see the cycling lanes in certain portions where it's a dual purpose and certain portion where there's a separate cycle track. That seems to be going all the way to Yonge Street from Bathurst. My question is around what's in place right now. The actual Viva corridor does not have cycle lanes. Is this being proposed long-term that we do have cycling lanes and then it goes further to streetscape and that portion gets modified?
Yes, it's a long-term vision. The raised cycle tracks are found to be safer and more enjoyable experience for the majority of cyclists. So the Viva on-road bike lane would transition into a raised cycle track on Davis.
So am I to assume that we didn't get it right now, or we should have had that in place already, not to build what's being built already?
Not necessarily. The first phase of Viva has the on-road, on-road bike lanes. The new phases of Viva do have the raised cycle track. There is a cost implication to that, so perhaps that's the reason why the YRTC decided to switch it.
Okay. Would you have a rough timeline on when that would happen?
For the Davis Drive?
For the Davis Drive specifically?
Davis Drive East or West? Davis Drive West?
Davis Drive from Yonge Street, east of Yonge Street, all the way to, I guess, Prospect. The Viva corridor itself that's in place right now, the modification to that.
No, just to clarify, I think, perhaps Mr. Nohammer could help, is that the bike lanes along east-west Davis Drive will be south of Davis Drive in the new corridor. Is that correct? On the transportation master plan, Mr. Nohammer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, our active transportation plan in town does envision east-west bicycle routes. It is unfortunate that we are not experiencing cycle facilities in the Davis Drive Viva Bus Rapid Way corridor that was just completed. We are making longer-term provisions for potential boulevard-style multi-use paths on Davis Drive in that corridor, although that would, as I said, it's a longer-term initiative as developments progress to try and capture at least easements in the boulevards for future cycling facilities. But definitely south of Davis Drive, we are looking at implementing an east-west cycleway in the more immediate term.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bazans?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks also for the presentation. There's a lot of very exciting features here, and you know, it would be nice if we could see that within a couple years' time frame instead of a 20-year time frame to have it completed. But my questions are around the time frame. And I know other councillors have sort of asked questions related to the staging of this, given that I think that there's a considerable dependency on what development is taking place and when, because we certainly don't want to see this effort and cost going into something that will only change because now you've got a new development going in and perhaps a new right-of-way onto Yonge Street required or whatever. And so that's a little concerning because, as Councillor Twinney said, we don't want to have something put in and then have it ripped up again. And so thinking in particular of Bathurst and Davis, where we know that the region is starting to put in the double turning lanes next year, starting on that process. We have a development on the north side and on the south side of Davis, just west of Eagle Street, where there'll be a new right-of-way from the north onto Davis Drive and from the south onto Davis Drive. And it seems to me that that would be a likely place to have streetlights put in. So, with that happening in the immediate term, how much would you see of being able to start at least some of this activity so you wouldn't have to be, ripping up the roads and then coming back in a year or two because it fits in with some other time frame for the broader streetscape plan versus looking at taking advantage of, doing everything at once. Because I think, what we're facing right now, certainly on Yonge Street and the surrounding areas between Davis and Savage Road is, all of this turmoil and disruption, and I think that the thought of having to do this piecemeal over the next 20 years would just be, anathema to a lot of residents, thinking that we're just going to be in a constant state of construction. So are these some of the things that we could advance parts of this plan based on what's happening with development or other regional plans anyway to do with the road and requiring construction? And certainly I think that looking at making it more pedestrian friendly at those intersections, providing for bike lanes, all of those things would be priorities, but not to have to go through an exercise of tearing up the roads, not having those features put in, and then coming back in 2 or 3 years because it just happens to fit with some other time frame and plan.
I'll direct that question to Jason.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, speaking particularly to Davis Drive West, we are implementing some of this vision through the, particularly the Sundial application, the Glenway application. So we did meet with the Development Coordination Committee. You had a little bit of a timing issue where you had some draft approved plans and engineering design plans that were fairly well advanced. But we were able to meet with the developers and, for example, give an example of how we're implementing this on the Sundial property in particular, where the original draft approved plan contemplated a sidewalk and then I think a future multi-use path or something, if I recall correctly, whereas the long-term vision through this is just contemplates a multi-use path. So we met with the developer and we said, well, instead of you building a sidewalk and then when the region urbanizes Davis Drive in 10 or 15 years, ripping out a sidewalk and putting in the multi-use path, why don't we just put in the multi-use path now? So that's starting to implement the vision. Similarly, within the site triangles at the new intersections that are coming into Davis Drive, I believe those will be implementing the various the aspects of the streetscape master plan. We've had a lot of discussion about tree planting, and I don't know that we've actually resolved that yet with the region. But for example, if we plant a lot of these trees now, and then in 10 years, the road is urbanized and the trees come out, and I think that's getting to your point. So I don't know that we've come to a resolution there on that one yet, but we are, to the best of our ability, where applications are being built now, we're trying to implement the elements of the streetscape master plan as best we can to avoid those throwaway costs.
Okay. Yeah, because right now that, along Davis Drive, there are, sections of sidewalk and then, nothing. And then sections of sidewalk and even just to connect the communities, the neighborhoods, to connect for walking trails, the north and south. We don't really have a whole lot there, so that's another opportunity to look at, I guess perhaps I'm saying is advancing, presuming that this is approved, advancing that portion of the plan, given I think it's probably more in a state of ready than perhaps Young North might be.
Well, that's a good part about having a plan like this, is that it sets the framework for the discussion as development comes forward, so that we avoid some of those throwaway costs. But timing, I think, as you've said, both the north and south side of Davis Drive West are quite imminent. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Broom?
Thank you. To staff, on page 28 of the Streetscape Master Plan report, it just says the town will seek to cost share the difference. I'm just wondering if you could explain what the process is when applying for cost share to the region.
I can answer that through you, Mr. Mayor. So the process to apply for the Municipal Streetscape Partnership Program is for the town to come to the region with an application, complete with a council commitment to cost share and to maintain on the streetscape enhancements, and to have the funds ready for the cost share. Then we go through a design review process. It's a two-stage review process, which involves a preliminary design submission. The region will do a review through the streetscape review team, communicate back with the town on any refinements that need to be made, and then a final design submission is made that's tender ready, and once that's ready to be recommended to our commissioner, who has delegated authority to approve the funds, then we then approve the funds and report back to our regional council with an update.
Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward and a pretty linear process.
Thank you. And my second question, which is probably impossible to answer, is with regards to timelines. Is there any way for us to have some kind of a timeline of, even an approximate timeline, so that we can have an idea of when all of these things are going to be implemented, and within that timeline, how the cost sharing versus the DCs versus the region versus Section 37, how it could all be divided out, or are we strictly just kind of a wait and see what developments are coming and hoping that some money will be there?
Jason?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess the only timeline that we know for sure is Yonge Street North, which is 2020, begin construction. None of the other three segments, to the best of my knowledge, are in the region's 10-year program to urbanize. So I know that gets reviewed every so often. So you're looking, at least 10 years for the other three segments. And as Commissioner mentioned earlier, applications may come along, Davis Drive East, for example, sort of the more urban areas. So you can collect, development charges through that to assist that when that project, when the region decides to urbanize, then the town has collected some money for that. Or if it's a big enough project, at the time you can, as the Commissioner mentioned, then maybe you might be able to do a segment of it in advance if it's a very important area or something that the town and the region really want to get done. You can do that in advance, and then when the region urbanizes, whenever that may be, you fill in the gap. So the only one we know for certain is Yonge Street North, and everything else at this point is at least 10 years out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Veil?
Thank you very much. Just a couple of follow-up questions, and I would like to thank Regional Councillor Taylor giving a bit more information on the funding, but I was having a difficult time following it, quite frankly, because it looks like, for example, Yonge Street North, well, the total cost may be estimated at $13.1 million. The actual cost to the town of Newmarket, because of sharing and other work being done, will actually be approximately $4.1 million. I think it was, and it could even be considerably less than that if the region takes over responsibility. So what I would ask, and I don't need it right here in this meeting, but I would like a chart that would just add those two columns to give me a better idea what the cost of town of Newmarket may be, in terms of the worst-case scenario, I'll say the example of Yonge Street North being 4.1 million, but if the region takes over the corridors, the cost to us will be considerably less than that. So that'd be very helpful for me, speaking to my constituents or speaking to anyone in the public, because people will look at this and immediately think, oh, that's the Newmarket cost, and that's what I thought it was too. So I thank for a bit of expansion on that, but I would benefit from 2 more columns on this for all of these, just so I have a better idea what our costs would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Regional Councillor.
Thanks. To that point, I would, I mean, I'm sure they can do that. The one thing I would suggest is that we probably, and I'm sure we would get back, but is once the debate and discussion has been finalized on what is almost certainly a transfer of jurisdiction and funding to the region of the full boulevard, it certainly looks like it's all but certain. I think staff would probably be reporting back to us on what that means, and in that reporting back, I would think it would be wise for us to get not just a general reporting, but how that speaks to Yonge Street North, because at that time we'd have a very specific understanding of what the fund. Right now, it's pretty hypothetical, and we're so close to figuring that out. I think that's, if I'm correct, that will be worked out through the budget process this year. I think it'll be introduced as part of it. I'm almost certain. So I think we'll get a very clear sense. The other 3, you can get the hypothetical math, but from what you've just heard, which is accurate, they're not in the 10-year plan, which means these numbers are very theoretic. If you're talking 10 years out, they're going to be very, very different numbers, right? So the one thing I would say is, yeah, they might go down. Sure. The other thing I would add is that I think that well, the others are not currently in the 10-year plan. Again, I think Davis East, because it's been so recently done, is probably some time out. I'd like to think the others could start to show up in the 10-year plan in the next few years. Remember, every year the 10-year plan adds another year and adds another year. And we are as a town already talking about trying to advance, particularly the Davis Drive west portion that you're speaking of, Councillor Bassans. The one thing I would say though is the phasing. Moving something up and saying, well, it would be nice to move it up because we're doing there's other roads coming out. I agree with what you're saying. Logically makes sense, but phasing's there for several reasons. One of them is because of you've got to manage budgets at the region too, and the cost of each of these projects and budgeted years. The other portion, though, of course, is that there's so much construction going on here. I believe it pains me, the mayor in particular, but both of us to say this, but we actually had to advocate a little to slow down Yonge Street North so that it wasn't going simultaneous with Yonge Street South. And then so we've got to get Yonge Street North done if you don't want that occurring at the same time as Davis Drive. And so you don't want Davis Drive West. I personally wouldn't want it occurring the same time as Yonge Street North. And so it's also phasing from an impact perspective on residents. And finally, I'd have to state that, well, I understand your position as the ward councillor. I wouldn't advocate for advancing Yonge Street West prior to Davis West prior to Yonge North. Yonge North is probably the most congested stretch of roadway. No, it isn't. It is definitely the most congested stretch of roadway in Newmarket, and it is in need of this work desperately. The good news is, for the public to know this, is the Bathurst extension, which is, wait until you drive on it, is a phenomenal piece of new infrastructure that's going to be connecting us through to Simcoe County and to Bradford area. That's going to open literally any day. Any day or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know, but it's very, very imminent. And that's going to make a huge difference on Yonge North, but it also means that Yonge North can now be undertaken where people have an option to take Bathurst when that becomes busy with construction in the 2020 range. The other thing I'd say is, just like Davis Drive West, there's some work going on there that would say, well, wouldn't it make sense if you're going to do that much work to do all the work? Yonge Street North, of course, is going to have quite a bit going on too. Hopefully the anticipated move of the entrance of the mall to line up with our fine grid network. There's other works that are going on, the potential for Slessor Square to occur. So it's a highly urbanized and urbanizing more rapidly, I think, than Davis West. So I think we really need to get that done. But believe you me, we're talking about it, and we agree that we want to advance Davis Drive as quickly as possible after that, Davis Drive West, as quickly as possible after that, and for the reasons you stated.
Thank you. Councillor Bassans.
Perhaps I didn't make myself very clear, because my question wasn't so much around shifting the priority from Yonge North to Davis, because I think Davis is more important in the bigger scheme of things than Yonge, but my question was more related to the unknown factors that exist on Yonge in terms of what will and won't be developed, and when developers will choose to start the application process and so forth, versus Davis Drive. I don't really see that there's going to be, once those two developments are completed, that there's going to be much of anything else and new going in there. So my questioning was more around, you know, if we have a section of road where we know there's a known sort of time frame for completion of work versus Yonge Street North, where we may have to wait for developers to start the process, and if we've already started the streetscaping and then they come in after the fact and then we have to tear things up. So my questioning was just more around how do you look at those factors and prioritize, not to suggest that just because Davis West is in my ward, and because actually Yonge North is too, that I would see sort of a difference in priority in terms of importance, but just, you know, could we look at that rather than starting something and then having to tear it up because developers are out of sync with the streetscape pattern. So just to clarify what my purpose in asking the question was.
I think this as well is that when the region designs a road or goes forward with a project, it's not just from curb to curb, it's from sidewalk to sidewalk. And as we see some development coming forward, we want to make sure that it goes up to the sidewalk so that we don't need to redo some of those things. Mr. Sheldon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to add that for those reasons that were stated, and as the regional councillor indicated, for Davis Drive West, I think you'll see the town taking an approach where we would try to get that programmed within the next 10 years as opposed to not being in the region's 10-year plan, because it is getting to a point where we know what's going to happen out there. The other point is relative to the potential shift in jurisdiction for boulevard maintenance and street lighting, things that have been on the table and discussed for some time. Staff will provide council with an impact analysis of that in terms of what that does mean on an annual basis for operating and capital when we're at that point, when we know that that is something that is definitive and moving forward at the region level.
Okay. Thank you. Regional Councillor?
I have one last thought, though, but I think on top of the vision we have here, the kind of work that we're seeing at Yonge Street North 2020, Bathurst Street opening any day, the Viva Rapid Ways, there are jurisdictions around Ontario, certainly in North America, who would dream of having this kind of constant investment in their corridors. So I think the other thing is the standard to which we're building out these corridors and streets is not necessarily common throughout all of Ontario and North America, and I think we're getting some great levels of service here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It wasn't until we saw Viva Next completed that we realized how tired Davis Drive looked and how much work it really needed, and I think that's starting to surface on some of the other areas. So this is a very refreshing approach. It sets out the guidelines and it sets out the principles that we will work to as the redevelopment takes place. I'm kind of envious of Councillor Quapis. He's been on the job for 2 weeks, and here we are looking at a very positive legacy that's going to take a very long time to implement, but will have generations of impact. And so that's the exciting part of this job, is looking at something that has such a huge impact and does change life and does change the character of our community. So you've done a great job, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you. Motion to receive the presentation. Councillor Vague, Councillor Twinney, all those in favor? That is carried. Why don't we bring forward item number 3 of our agenda? Thank you very much. And that is the Planning and Building Services Report 2016-40, and it addresses the Davis Drive Streetscape Master Plan. The recommendations are before you. Could I have a motion with respect to the recommendations? Councillor Vague, Councillor Kerwin. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Should we take a 15-minute break? What are we looking at? Mm-hmm. 5 minutes? No, maybe 15 minutes, David. 15 minutes, so if we can come back at about 25 after. Great. If I could have everyone take their chairs, please.
It's not that hard. And actually, Mike will probably introduce it. Okay. So, there you go.
Okay, we'll go forward to item number 2, which is a presentation from our financial business analyst, Mr. Mays. If you could provide us with an overview and an introduction, I would appreciate that.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Council. Well over a decade ago, we had an initiative called Let's Make It Happen, and one of the things it looked at was the implementation of a stormwater management rate. And for various reasons, we haven't had the resource or the time to look into one. The primary driver behind it was to reduce the tax rate, to take some of the pressure off the tax increases. The model you're going to see now, that's not the primary goal anymore. But as we develop more and more information, we find it important to move to a sustainable, dedicated funding source. And there's some other reasons as well in that. I'm not going to give away any of the presentation that Kevin's about to do, but he's done a lot of work on this, and it's great that we've had the opportunity to have a resource to be able to bring us forward. So this is a plan that we would like to put in place for 2017. There are some preliminary numbers in there. As you're quite aware, the budget is not finalized at this time, nor are we proposing what the fees and charges would be. That will be coming on November 28th for approval on December 5th. So any numbers you see of that nature are just in here for illustrative purposes. And on that basis, I'd like to pass it over to Kevin.
Okay, Kevin?
All right, so today we're talking about the stormwater charge. And a stormwater charge is a user fee to support the stormwater management services here at the town of Newmarket. Here's our agenda for today. First, I'll introduce you to stormwater management just so you understand the basics of the service. Then we'll talk about why have a stormwater charge in Newmarket, the rationale behind it. Then we'll talk about how the stormwater charge would be calculated. And finally, what would the impact be of the stormwater charge on businesses and residents in the town. So introduction to stormwater. What is stormwater? Stormwater is rainwater, snow melt, irrigation, car wash water, any water that runs off of your property into the street or into a creek and river. A key concept in stormwater management is impervious areas. Something that is said to be impervious is something that does not absorb water. So rooftops, driveways, parking lots, when it rains, the water runs right off of it, and then it creates an immediate problem for the town to prevent flooding and protect the environment. Now, as you can imagine, not all properties in Newmarket have the same amount of impervious areas. So low runoff properties in Newmarket, like natural areas, vacant properties, golf courses, tend to be about 9% impervious. Medium runoff properties, like residential and institutional properties, tend to be around 44% impervious. And high runoff properties, like commercial, industrial, and mixed-use properties, tend to be around 88% impervious. So the higher that impervious percentage, the more of a challenge those properties present to the stormwater system. So just to give you an idea of context, if you add up all of Newmarket's real assets, pipe assets, and pond assets, the town of Newmarket owns $85 million worth of stormwater infrastructure. So why have a stormwater charge? Currently, the town is facing what I like to call a perfect storm. We are facing three major issues: flood prevention, aging assets, and environmental protection. We don't have time in this presentation to go through all of those in detail, but there will be a video later going through it, and then if you have any questions, we can go through those items individually. I just want to talk specifically about aging assets. The town of Newmarket recently conducted a capital financing sustainability strategy, and what we found was in the next 10 years, we need $17 million to replace the assets that are reaching the end of their useful lives. So we have an infrastructure deficit here with stormwater management infrastructure. It's not uncommon, but with this stormwater charge, we're proposing a solution for that. So the stormwater charge is a funding solution. It has been implemented in many municipalities in Canada as well as Ontario. So all the municipalities on the right-hand column are Ontario municipalities, and it's been effective for closing that infrastructure gap that they have. So how would the charge be calculated? If you look at different stormwater charges across Ontario and across Canada, you'll find that none of them are exactly the same. And the reason for that is that every municipality has to balance two different principles. There's the principle of simplicity and this principle of fairness. So when a stormwater charge is said to be simple, it's easy to understand and easy to administer. And when it's at the fair end of the spectrum, customers are charged based on what it costs to provide the customer with that service. So you can make a charge extremely simple by having a flat rate for everyone, and that's really easy to administer, but it's not quite fair because people aren't charged based on usage. Or you could have something at the fair end of the spectrum that has a lot of administrative costs, but then is quite costly to administer, and then you have money going towards the program of collecting the funds and not necessarily going towards the service itself. So you have to strike that balance between the two, and every municipality finds a different balance. So the town of Newmarket proposed to go somewhere in the middle of those two with the development intensity model. So with this model, customers are charged based on the size of their property multiplied by the runoff level group rate. So a low runoff level property would be charged the lowest rate per square meter, and the high runoff property would be charged the highest rate per square meter. So we're not going and digitizing every property, measuring the impervious areas. We're not going to that extent, but also provides a customized bill so that a business on Main Street doesn't pay the same amount as a regional shopping complex at Yonge and Davis. So that's the recommendation that we made to council, and then we went for public consultation to see if we struck the right balance. So we started with a press release and a Facebook ad, and with all of our communications, we wanted to make sure that our communications were easy to understand so that people could engage with it. And it really paid off with our Facebook ad. With that, we issued the ad, and it was viewed 10,000 times in the town, the Newmarket area, was interacted with 320 times, and it was liked 44 times, and that's very encouraging for proposing the implementation of a new charge. And then with that advertised our PIC, and at the PIC, and we were present at the Newmarket Open House as well, and the feedback that we got from there was, once we ran people through the rationale of the charge and how it was a fair, stable, dedicated funding source that will help protect homes and businesses from devastating floods in the future, people got it. People understood that this was something that needed to be done. And then also, we consulted with the Newmarket Chamber of Commerce and the Newmarket Environmental Advisory Committee to get some policy refinements as we were going through the final steps of the development of this proposed charge. So then once we got the mandate to develop this stormwater charge, we developed software to calculate it programmatically. So this might not look like much, but it's a quite powerful tool. So with this, you input the funding requirement, the year for which you wish to evaluate the properties, and then the imperviousness of each group, and then you hit go. Then it uses an algorithm to sort the 27,000 properties into those 3 runoff groups. So here is the a result of the algorithm. And so if you look at this map, you'll see that the low-level runoff properties are in the southwest southwest corner with the Oak Ridges Marine area, and then you can see the golf courses are low-level runoff. And then the medium-level runoff are all your stable neighborhoods, and then you can see that throughout the town. And then the high-level runoff are along your Yonge and Davis and Mulock corridors, and then in the employment lands. And then there are some low runoff properties because there are still some vacant lands in the employment area, so that's covered as well. And then the gray is the exempt property. So those are all the town and the school board that are covered by that. So we did vigorous testing to make sure that this system worked and that it was very low cost for us to administer in the end. So stormwater charge, here is a video that we created to help communicate this charge to the public.
We want to introduce you to a new stormwater charge that will appear on your Newmarket property tax bill starting in 2017 under the Special Charges section. What is stormwater and why is stormwater management important? Stormwater is the rain and melted snow that flows from your property onto the streets and into the storm drains. Along the way, the stormwater picks up debris, chemicals, and other pollutants from rooftops and paved surfaces that could upset the water quality of our lakes and rivers. Stormwater management is essential to Newmarket. It reduces the negative effects of stormwater and lowers the risk of flooding that can damage your property and the environment. Stormwater management, however, can be costly because there is more stormwater than ever before. Why? Because Newmarket is a growing community. Every rooftop and every parking lot increases the water runoff that flows into storm drains. And heavy rainfalls are more frequent due to climate change. All this stormwater is creating expensive wear and tear on our aging infrastructure. The stormwater charge will help maintain and improve our stormwater system for the community and the environment. How will the stormwater charge be calculated? It will be based on the size of your property and the runoff level. Properties will be sorted into 3 runoff level groups: low, medium, and high. Natural areas have a low runoff level, residential and institutional properties have a medium runoff level, and industrial and commercial properties have a high runoff level. Therefore, the size of your property times the runoff level group rate equals your stormwater charge. This is a fair and transparent way to fund our stormwater system, which will reduce the risk to you, your property, and the environment for many years to come. For more information, visit newmarket.ca/stormwatercharge.
So there we go. That's the video summarizing everything. And then with that cheery video, I think people will be asking what's the impact on their pocketbook. So what would be the impact of the stormwater charge? So here is the estimated average stormwater charge for the low, medium, high runoff groups. And as Mike said earlier, these are not final numbers. We're going through the budget process, and we'll propose the final rates in December. So for the low runoff property, it would be about 1 cent per square meter. And then we know the average size of the property. So the average annual fee would be $185. For a medium runoff property, it would be 6 cents per square meter. And with the average size, the annual rate would be $38. And with the high runoff properties, the rate would be 13 cents per square meter, and with an average annual charge of $475. Now this is the with the proposed implementation. We're proposing it to be revenue neutral in the first year. So they will see, customers will see like a new 38 annual fee, but that's not going to be an increase of $38 because this is a new user fee. The impact will be different for different types of customers. So for the low runoff properties, what this table shows is the total annual average municipal costs without stormwater. So that's your annual tax bill plus your annual water bill. And then below that is your total annual average municipal cost with the stormwater charge. That would be your tax bill, plus your water bill, plus your stormwater bill. So low runoff properties would see an average increase of $131. And the reason for that is that a few low runoff properties are owned by the LSRCA, the Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority, and right now they currently pay payment in lieu. So once this becomes a user fee funded service, this will increase their charge, and that's why you see an increase there. 75% of the low level runoff properties would see a decrease because their runoff would be reduced. For the medium runoff properties, they would actually see a $14 decrease in annual fees. And the reason for that is that residential properties, what I like to call asset rich, but runoff poor, so their tax bill will go down more than their new stormwater bill will go up. And then the high runoff properties would see an average increase of $236, so their tax bill would go wouldn't go down as much as their new stormwater bill would go up. So they would see an increase there. And so with any new charge, people tend to ask, how can we get it reduced? So here is a slide to address that. So at the current time, we are not recommending to have a credit program for residential properties. And the reason for that is that it's a negative benefit to both the ratepayer and the utility at this time. Because the stormwater charge is so low, $38 a year, any incentive will be minimal. So if you implement a rain barrel on your property and you get a 10% discount, you'll get $3.80 for a $100 rain barrel. So like that doesn't have a great financial payback. And also from the town side, if everyone on the street implemented a rain barrel, we talked to the operations staff and they wouldn't feel comfortable changing the amount that they clean out the catch basins, those grates at the side of the street. So there wouldn't be any operational savings for us. And finally, for every, the city of Mississauga did a calculation for themselves of, for every of the cost of the program, and what they calculated was for every dollar that they give out in stormwater credits, they need to spend $4 on administration. So implementing a stormwater credit for the residential program, we would need to raise the rates for everyone in order to give some people a relatively lower rate. So at this point, we're not recommending a residential rebate program or a credit program. But the economies of scale are different for the industrial and commercial properties. With it, we can, with the site plan approval process, you do a stormwater assessment, and all the information that we need is done through there, and then it's just a matter of copying, like taking those numbers and applying it to the charge, and then that's relatively easier. So we have a great program that is low cost, that fairly covers the industrial and commercial properties. And that's the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. I understand that hard copies of the presentation will be distributed later. Is that right, Mr. Mays? Shortly. Okay, great, thank you. Questions, Councillor Kerwin?
Yes. Would you go back to a specific area? You were low and medium. And I want to look at, this is College Manor here. This area here.
Kevin, if you could use the mouse, and then
yeah,
that way
mouse
you and
I
Councillor
want to look at
Kerwin
Maple Street, 317 Maple Street in particular, where I live. It's at the end of Sutherland.
Sorry, I don't know where that is.
Okay, it's right, oh, I'll show you where it is. Kevin. It's,
right there in the brown area.
It's right, let me see, there's College Manor, so it's over here.
Is that not where it's pointing right now? We was a moment ago.
Yeah, up a bit.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, you're up there. You're on Gorham Dave. Yeah.
Right up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Oh, what?
That's medium.
It's medium. Okay, medium. Okay, the residents in there, well, first of all, just to let you know specifics, I'm dealing with exact numbers. My property taxes are $9,000 a year. I'm way over compared to everyone else, but I haven't gone to impact yet because I sit on council, so it's not fair. But I'm paying probably $4,000 in taxes more than my neighbors, and the value of their property is about the same as mine. I have 1.23 acres of land, half on the north side of the river and half on the south side of the river, or the creek called the Bogart Creek. Okay? Basically in the spring, the Bogart Creek floods, and my property is used as a stormwater management pond. It floods, it comes over its bank by about a foot, and it comes up to sometimes the berm, okay? Basically speaking, I have no runoff, nor do my neighbors. In fact, we're containing a lot of the runoff from upstream. So why wouldn't we get a benefit rather than pay? Because we're a holding tank for the excess water that's coming down from the east, coming out of the Bogart Creek area, or coming down from Pangman Springs and flowing through my property, and my property is being used as a stormwater management pond. It floods, I get the benefit of the silt, but it floods every spring. The water comes over the bank, particularly if you have a severe winter. So I'm going to be ending up being penalized, and all the people who are along there who are eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, and have kept their lands in a rough stage are being penalized. How can I justify it? By an extra tax on what I'm already paying at $9,000 a year. And that's an extra tax. This is what stormwater management pond is. And I know down the road we're looking at a huge expenditure again for dredging Fairy Lake because it's filled again. Already I'm beginning to see islands pop up in the middle of Fairy Lake where the goose sit on those in the springtime. And particularly this summer, you could see the silt. So I know what it cost the last time. It was about $1.5 million or more, shared by the Conservation Authority.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sheldon?
I'm concerned this is another tax on people who are environmentally friendly, because I have rain barrels. Virtually speaking, from my property, I have virtually no runoff, but I'm being used by the town as a stormwater management retention pond.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sheldon?
And I'm being personal.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Being a workshop, this is a point to raise questions that we can either try to answer today or to follow up on. So in this case, the question relates to properties that have a combination of floodplain and they're outside of the floodplain. And we can review that and get back to council in terms of how that works insofar as a potential storm utility rate is concerned. Also, if that has any impact relative to taxes, how property is taxed if it has a portion in floodplain. And in addition, deal with the issue that has been raised that during flooding, yes, there is storage on that property, but when it's not flooding, there is runoff from that property. So staff can address that question. If not now, we'll make a note of that and follow up with council members.
Okay, and of course we're at committee, so we'll be dealing with the report as well. But it's a question that can be addressed. Okay, Councillor. Yep. Thank you, Councillor Hempel.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, we're seeing a lot of development where it's really getting a lot of tighter properties and more lot coverage. Was there any kind of consideration given to looking at properties that have less green space and a lot of lot coverage? There's something in between those two. Maybe some of the older homes have more permeable surfaces and are dealing with some of that runoff on their own property, and maybe I'm wrong in that assumption, but if maybe I could get an explanation on that.
Kevin?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So from the outset, we have to balance the two principles between simplicity and fairness, is that the more that we divide these properties into different categories, the more complex it becomes, and the more administration costs there are. So we tried more than like 3 different divisions. We tried 5, we tried 6, we tried 4, and things like that. And we just saw what we could do reliably well. And with this, we got to the medium level runoff encompassing all residential properties. And we did talk at the PIC and at the open house that people were saying like, hey, I have an older property and my house is relatively smaller to the rest of my to the rest of my property. But they were okay with that because they didn't want us to get into the digitizing their property and having those additional administrative costs. So then that was made us policy's decision to not go into that level of detail, that people were fine with the higher level of detail.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Thank you. Another question that I do have is maybe for the viewing audience, can you tell us what on the tax-supported part of our budget, that what amount is being actually removed in total?
So the amount that would be removed from the tax-supported budget is 1.4 million, and that is 435,000 from the operating costs and 983,000 from the capital contribution.
And through this new charge that's being suggested to be implemented, what kind of preliminary estimates do we have on what kind of revenue or additional money will be raised?
So for the first year, we're proposing that it's revenue neutral, so there would be no additional revenue in the first year.
And then you showed us on the chart, and that was the public could see that, I guess, on one of the slides, that we're in a deficit of, maybe you can go back to that chart. So let me just guess.
Are you talking about this one?
Yes. So in for 1 to 10 years, we have a replacement value of $17 million. And I guess that's a big driver in us considering bringing forward these new charges. So we see, now we have another chart where you showed that it'll be a net reduction of about $38 to the average homeowner. How will that, what will change in the next 10 years to the average homeowner, just so we get a clear picture of that, or so I get a clear picture and the residents understand that as well?
For that one, so if we go to the funding level that the Capital Finance Sustainability Strategy recommends, it would the rate would be around $60 per year with an total increase of $15 per year instead of the negative $14.
Okay, so I'm sorry to ask so many questions, but so the initial was that an average reduction to the average homeowner was $15 or $38. What was the number again?
$14.
In the first year, $14. So after 10 years, can you tell me what the increase, suggested increase will be after 10 years?
So we haven't worked out the phase-in strategy yet. So with this, we will be able to develop a 6-year financial plan like we do for water and wastewater, and that will outline the changes that we would need to do in subsequent years. So depending on council's taste of how quickly to get to that funding level, that's how we'll set the rate increases.
I see. Yeah, you know, with the presentation and us seeing a net reduction to the average homeowner for myself in the first year, it's very desirable. And, you know, if you ask most people, they'll say, yeah, I'm totally good with that. But what I'd like to see is maybe in some chart what that increase is going to be over the next 10 years and what just so we have some kind of something that we can point to and say, here's what it's going to cost you extra to the average resident.
Mr. Mays?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on that from Councillor Hampton. Some of the difficulties we would have doing such a chart at this time is these are estimates that were provided by Hemson Consulting a couple of years ago when they did a financial sustainability strategy for us. We are undergoing an update doing an asset management strategy. There'll be a presentation coming on that in November, as well as updates to the asset management plan. So these numbers may or may not be appropriate to actually at this time say this is what will be over the next 10 years until we have that better information, because we have to also look at the balances we have in the reserves at this time. These estimates were based upon the useful life of the assets, which as we delve more into the techniques for maintaining assets may or may not be appropriate. So I think it would be a little premature at this time to do that sort of projection until we have some more information. Sorry, if I could just for a moment, I heard a comment earlier that this is an additional tax. I would like to clarify that this, first of all, technically this is not a tax, this is a user fee. And as one of the things we're trying to do here is make things revenue neutral, this is not an additional tax. This would actually be a tax reduction and replacement of that with a user fee. In some cases, that user fee would be not as substantial as the amount of the tax. In some cases, it will vary from user to user. But I know there's been some controversy over duplicate taxing. It's not our intention. This will be revenue neutral.
Okay, just some final comments. You know, I guess for the average resident, you know, we're talking about a reduction in our taxes, but for the average resident, they look at what their final bill is at the end of the year, whether that's a user fee or it's a taxation. You know, I guess they look at what the cost to run their home is, and that's part of that expense, a monthly expense or a yearly expense. So I'm hoping that prior to us, or as council, being asked to look and accept this kind of new tool to gather money to deal with our infrastructure and our and deal with stormwater and major rain events that are taking place, that we'll get a clearer picture of what the actual cost is going to be. I need to have that clear picture to understand what it's going to cost the average resident in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. So I'm hoping that we come up with some kind of an estimate so I have a clear understanding of what I'm actually passing on to the residents.
Would that be reflected in the 6-year plan that you're proposing, Mr. Mays?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that would be the opportunity to do that. We could do that at a time. We have provided what the information will be in the first year. That for the average resident, this would be a overall savings of $14 when they look at the total of their bills, what they're paying on tax, what they're paying on water, and what they'd be paying on the stormwater management rate. If required by council, we can do estimates what they'll be for the next 5 years, 10 years. I'm just saying that there would be limited value because we need more analysis for that. When we come forward with a 6-year water and wastewater plan, which will tie into our asset management plan and strategies, we'll be able to give a more precise definition on those numbers. But as I said, if required, we'll provide those estimates.
And that 6-year plan would come forward in advance of the fees and charges?
I do not see that as being a... Okay. First of all, we have a pretty good estimate on what the numbers will be for the stormwater management in the operating budget and the requirements in the capital, and those are the numbers. So the final numbers probably will not vary much from that. The turnaround time between now and then to be able to do a 6-year plan, I'm not sure I'd be able to commit to that. We could perhaps early in 2017 we'd have that available, but I'm not sure we're going to have the time to do that before the fees and charges.
The intent in the budget is that it would be revenue neutral.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Hepburn.
Thank you. So on a staff level, as was mentioned before, this is just a workshop and it's kind of an understanding for us.
This actually is a committee.
Or sorry.
Work committee. Yeah,
so okay. This was more for information. And are we being asked to pass this and accept this right now? Okay, so for one for myself, I'd like to have some more information.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Broom.
Thank you. And just to echo Councillor Hempin, I too would like to have a little bit more of an understanding of, you know, it's coming out of the right pocket, what's been coming out of the left pocket type of scenario, understanding how much the tax base is going to be coming down per resident versus this moving to a user fee. And again, just receiving the presentation now, I would have liked to have had a bit more time to review this. Just a question for yourself. Could you provide me with an example of a property in Newmarket that's considered a low runoff group? Like an example, you said LSRCA owns some property. Is there a specific one that you could use as an example?
I believe the Ferry Lake area is owned by LSRCA. And
So that would be an example. And then a high runoff would just be a typical business, or?
Yeah, typical business like Upper Canada, like all along the young corridors, mostly higher level runoff properties, and then in the employment lands, they're mostly high level runoff properties unless it's vacant, and then there are some institutional properties in there as well that are considered medium level runoff.
So to the best of your knowledge, there are no houses that are anything but medium?
There are some that are low level runoff just because they are zoned as open space for 50% of their property. So with that, there's a criteria that if it's zoned as open space, then it's mostly green, and then they would be categorized as low.
Okay, and the slide that had the municipalities that are already doing this, you mentioned Aurora and Richmond Hill. Do we know of any incentives that they are currently offering any of the residents in terms of what you had mentioned before, that you disagreed with offering residents any incentive? Are they offering anything that we're not?
Aurora, no. Markham, I don't think so. I think they're going with a flat fee with their municipality, so it's very much on the simple end of the spectrum. So they don't. Their attitude was, we don't want to get into those type of things. Kitchener and Waterloo do offer those programs, but they advise against it from a financial perspective.
So Rain Barrel is more expensive than a typical discount. Okay. And I'm sorry, and what about Richmond Hill?
Richmond Hill, yeah, I think they're more towards the simple end of the spectrum as well.
Okay. And thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sheldon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to set the record straight, I had referred to a workshop. This is a special committee of the whole, so if I've got council members thinking we're in a workshop format, but the point that I did make is still valid, that if we cannot answer any of the questions that you have today, we'll make a note of those and we will provide council with the response.
Okay. Thank you. Regional Councillor.
Great. Thanks for the presentation, and I fully support the direction we're going in. I certainly, like other members of council, have some questions and would like to get a little more information. In particular, it's sort of around the chart where you're saying impact of implementing stormwater, low, medium, high, and the percentages. And to Councillor Kerwin's point, if we could get a better understanding of, for example, you said that the 5.55 for low is heavily impacted by the LRCA. And so, again, I worry that when we're trying to communicate to the public, or the public is viewing this, then they're getting I know it's technically accurate, but a skewed number. And so could we get that corrected for I'll use the term corrected, or remove the LRSCA impact? So just for what's the percentage increase in the low when you don't include that?
Okay.
Because I think that would be more indicative of what a resident. I'm sure there's no commercial, so it must be only the residential ones. What's their number look like on average?
We could take the median, and that would take out the high outliers, and then the median would provide a great number for that as well.
Okay, you can't do it by just removing the it's too hard to do, remove the properties?
Well, you could do it either way, but if we are charging Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority for the user fee, then to pull that number out.
I guess, or to somebody said examples. I mean, I'm just trying to give somebody, so try to picture yourself as a resident who's going, okay, I happen to fall into low, and I know there's not many. I'm reading right now, I'm getting a 5% increase, but what I'm hearing is that's probably not true. How do we get, you can tell me later, but what's the best way to give them a bit of a picture into what to expect?
Okay.
And conversely, I think what Councillor Kerwin's talking about is the medium category. That piece of information like there, and you may have it, is what percentage of properties in Newmarket that are medium, which looks like, first of all, which percentage of properties in Newmarket are designated medium, residential properties? And of those, what are seeing an increase? You see what I'm saying? So I suspect it's probably 90% of the properties in Newmarket plus are medium. And of that, let's say 25,000 properties, what number are actually seeing an increase? And I suspect, and the reason Councillor Kerwin was asking this question, is that the example he's using is that the one area you may, I'm only guessing because I'm not an expert on this like you are, but I'm guessing you may see an increase is if you're a large medium property. So if If you're a large, low property, you might not. I'm not dealing with the high. I see that largely as business and commercial and separate. I'm dealing with the residents' perspective right now. But I could imagine if you've got a sizable lot and you're median, you might actually fall into the area of seeing an increase in year one. And so are we able to get some data around that? Sort of what percentage are medium to begin with, and what number of those will see an increase? Or, is it only 2% or 1%, or how many houses? Something like that, so we can better understand and better convey to the public what they're dealing with. I mean, on average, what we're saying is people are going to see a decrease of $14 in that category. The low, we're saying they're going to see an increase of $131, but again, for residential properties in low, I suspect that's not the number. And so if there was a way to get that. The other thing I wanted to touch on was the idea about the cost. And so first question I have is your aging assets slide. As Councillor Hempen pointed out, early on, obviously, and part of what's driving this is that big number in years 1 to 10. But then if you look at years 21 to 50, a 30-year range, we've got less than $2 million projected. So, and forgive me for not knowing how this works, but assuming that we were able to, using this fee, this user fee, start to meet our obligations fully, and I know that's a big assumption, but if we were, then in that 21 to 50-year range, would I assume we would be building our reserves? Or our asset is that what we'd be doing those years? Because I've got to believe in a 30-year period we'll collect more than $2 million. So, or will we be in such a deficit already? So anyway, that's my question on that.
Yes. So through you, Mr. Mayor, the idea here is that we have immediate capital needs in the 1 to 10-year time horizon, and then we also have great needs in the 51+ year time horizon. You can see that the 90 million there is there, and it's all reaching the end of its useful life within a few years, because there was a lot of development that was done in the 80s that'll be then expired at that time. So then this stormwater charge will then serve as an automatic savings plan, like residents do for retirement. Is that you don't need your money for retirement while you're working, but then once you retire, that's when you need the money. And this will be for that time period where we only need $200 or $2 million. We're setting aside for the retirement of all of those assets.
So we will be putting money towards reserves, and certainly in that period. Okay. So my last question is just I want to clarify how this works in my mind, and if this is correct, this is why I can support this probably even now. But if council wants to get more information, I'm fine with that too. But am I correct that what we're supporting today is really only two things? One is the principal move to this system, and, well, actually, we're probably not even doing that, but we're getting pretty darn close to approving the year one implementation, which is, on average, a cost savings to residents. After that, what Councillor Hempen's wanting to see, and I agree, it would be very helpful to see those numbers is when we can get good information, but the further projection out of what those numbers would be, isn't that much like our asset replacement numbers and projections out? And while we know what the need is, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the increase that year. We're not approving staff on a 10-year plan to set the rate themselves. In other words, every year we're going to come back and council will set this rate. And if we wanted to, might be not responsible, but if we wanted to, we could keep the rate exactly where it is for a long time. So am I correct that what we're really approving here is moving to this user system from the tax-based system, and at least in principle, in theory, that the projection that in year one, the numbers that are provided, which would be a slight decrease, recognizing that in future years there would be increases, but those would be year-over-year approvals, and probably, like many things, including our asset replacement and even what we'd like to do in town with our operating budget, et cetera, we don't fully fund everything that's needed, and we may not approve rates in year 2, 3, 7, and 10 that fully fund the need. We might choose to provide a rate that funds it 50% or 75%, and like asset replacement, perhaps look to other levels of government in the future to help with municipal costs because of our tax base, et cetera. Is that an accurate statement?
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes, that is in year 2, and thereafter, what would govern would be discussions with council at budget, targets that have been set by council, and that would help to shape the 6-year plan. So, you know, we do have an infrastructure gap in many, many areas, and this is one of them. So that it would be subject to that annual review to determine what increase, if any, would go forward, and what level of a capital program that council is prepared to work with.
And so like other areas, we would set that rate annually. I mean, we would have a multi-year plan, but we would have to approve it, set it, and approve it annually.
That's correct, yeah, multi-year plan, and each year you're taking a look at it.
Okay. So I guess my thoughts on it are I definitely support moving to this system. I think that the infrastructure gap is real, and in some areas, when we know the challenges with climate change and storm, frequencies of severe storms, we need to ensure we've got a system that can respond to that. And having this embedded in the tax rate, I think, makes it very difficult to meet the kind of needs we're facing in this area. So I do support the direction. I agree that there's some, and don't get me wrong, there's amazing information here, and it's very well done. But there is a few areas where I think it would be helpful to get a little more. As has been said, some multi-year projections when available. I'd like to hear a little more about some of those categories so residents can better anticipate what this means for them. And will there eventually be, and when, will there be, much like property impact or something, will there be a system where a taxpayer could go online and say, here's my property, calculate my rate, please? Will we ever have that, or is that like?
Yeah, right now, residents will be able to do that manually with their property bill. There's the site area on there, and then if you're classified as medium, then you can apply that rate. And then we're thinking of in year 1 of having a tool that you could type in an address online, and then it would pull your site area and then what you're classified as. So then you can quickly see what the charges would be your charge, and then if you're curious, you could see what other people or other businesses are charged within the town, and that could be a great communication tool. It's been really effective. It was done in Mississauga and was very well used.
And are we able to? I guess we can extrapolate from this information. The other part of it. So let's say I live on address X somewhere, medium residential. I can then calculate what my rate will be. I guess you can sort of extrapolate from here, but if you're in a medium, should we be able to publish to somebody, this is currently, because they won't be able to figure it themselves, this is currently what you're paying through user rate and taxes, and this is what you'll, not through water rate and taxes, and this is what you'll be, so they can actually figure out what they'll be paying, but then they can also go, and this is what I was paying. Mm-hmm. How will they be able to get that number?
So we'll be sending out a flyer to all homes and businesses when this is implemented, and then we'll talk about the average impact on the residential customer, and then we'll talk about that $14 decrease, and then if people have further questions, they can call in and seek more information if they choose.
And if they called in, we'd be able to tell them this is what you currently pay for this service, and
yes,
this is what you'll be paying under the new system.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mays?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, the intention of the report and the presentation today is not to set the rate at this time, not to set a budget at this time, but to set the framework. What we'd like to do with the stormwater management is moving in the same direction as we've done with water and wastewater, where we still come forward on an annual basis to have the rate approved. We still have a budget that's approved on an annual basis, and we do a 6-year plan, a financial plan that establishes the direction we're going on and what we anticipate the rates will be on a go-forward basis. So there always will be that opportunity. The reason I was hesitating when we look at asset management, as you see, there's a big bulk of replacements in the first 10 years, and that was based upon a set of assumptions that may or may not still be appropriate. So it may not be necessary for us to get to that level. Perhaps some of those 10-year projects can be deferred into the future years, and that we can see more of a balancing of the capital program. And until we get to that point, we look at what are the impacts of deferring some of these projects. It's very difficult to estimate what things are, but we will make that attempt. We will give some examples of various properties in the classes that show what the impact would be on an individual basis, and I think that I think you'll be happy with that. But that is the intent, just to look at going to a rate group, to set this up as a user fee to take it off taxes. The individual, we can assist in that, and that can be part of the communication so they can do the calculations themselves. We can provide, we know based upon the numbers we have at this point, the decrease in costs represents, is it 2.6? Approximately 2.6 reduction in taxes. So, someone can apply that to their taxes and say 2.6 on my town taxes, that's this amount, my property, and you can get, we'll put, we have the preliminary numbers here, but you can see the size of your property, multiply that out, and you can see what you would be paying on that basis. So we can go through that exercise on a few example properties and do that, but we'll try to set something up on the website, or at least have our customer service people ready, or some communications ready on that, so that people can do those calculations themselves. But there also is a minor impact on the water rate as well. I just wanted to point that out as well. So people will see their water rates not going up as much as they would otherwise in 2017.
Just to follow up that, but just to be clear, when you're saying that we may be able to defer some of the 1 to 10 year work, that's not because we're just trying to push it off and it might have challenges. It's more because of conversations we had earlier about the fact that the lifespan of some of these assets more recently have been are being seen to be longer than might have been anticipated or might have been recorded previously. Is that?
To you, Mr. Mayor, that would be correct. The capital financing and sustainability strategy just based everything upon the lifespan of the asset. If we said it was a 40-year asset, they just assumed it was going to be placed in 40 years, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, as we go into different sort of maintenance the procedures and protocols, it's perhaps that can be expanded, but also that depending on the level of service we land on, perhaps 40 years is not appropriate. It could be a longer period of time. But until we get into that more detailed analysis, that is a very rough and conservative estimate on the replacement of assets.
Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Kerwin, and then Councillor Kloppus.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, and I forgot when Kevin Yaroskovich, I really appreciate the work that you've done. This is a brilliant piece of work. Make no mistake about it. And secondly, I sit on the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, and one of the problems we have throughout the authority's command is stormwater management ponds. They were the most inefficient way we ever held back water, and that's what we're beginning to find, and they're extremely costly, and they're going to come back to bite us. And this recommendation is part of the solution to contain the costs and take off some of those stormwater management ponds off the system and make them more effective and efficient. Okay, so they're working at this, and I really appreciate this. Now we go out to the public to keep them informed. How many people through Facebook, through all the media that we used, responded to this survey about stormwater, a stormwater charge? How many people?
Yep.
We must have that number.
So,
because I know in the last by-election, 28% of Ward 5 went out to vote. So how many people actually responded to this and are knowledgeable about what we're doing within the town of Newmarket, which I would say the population is close to 100,000. So how many people? What's the number? 100? 150?
With the
Facebook, everything.
Mr. Mayor. So with the Facebook ad, it was viewed 10,000 times in the Newmarket area, and then 320 people physically clicked on it to learn more about it.
Right.
And then about 18 different people commented and provided discussion, and then 44 people liked the post. So
if you really put that over the population, you're really looking at 0.001% of the really people in Newmarket are really informed about what we're doing here with stormwater management charges. It's just infinitesimally small, and that's typical. When we make a comment on the budget, we have a public meeting, and the only person in the audience was my wife, okay, commenting on the budget. So really, what I'm saying here is we've got to get the people, as I really agree with Deputy Mayor John Taylor, we've got to inform the public, but somehow we're not. And that's what scares me. All of a sudden, they begin to see a tax change not a tax, but it's, what did you call it? A user fee, okay, a user fee. And it's going to impact something. And we talk about the floodplain. You see, there's an area of town that's totally in the floodplain. Most of my property, and the property along Sutherland and Maple and I do Charlotte Street or the Bogart Pond area, almost all of it is in the floodplain. And yet we're not getting any tax concession to the property. All I'm doing is taxed on the fact I own a certain amount of land, and yet it's in the floodplain. It's not usable. As I say, if I went to impact, I know I would get a sizable reduction, because the taxes I'm paying compared to the same value right across the board is I'm paying about $4,000 more per year than the value of my house and other people. That's a sizable amount of tax dollars. But as I say, I sit on town council. I don't believe it behooves me to protest the taxes that I'm being charged. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to this, Kevin, not at all, because something has to happen, okay? It has to happen because what we did years ago was poor. Stormwater management, they're poor. They always have to be dredged. And now we've come up with LEAD, low impact development, which is a better way of containing. But I must say, this town is an exemplary town because really we haven't had a lot of flood damage. After the Western Creek flooded, we corrected it, but we spread it over the complete tax basin. We didn't put it on the people in that area. So this town has done some exemplary things. But sometimes I'm concerned about the fact that being an environmentalist and an extreme conservative in the usage of things, I look at my water bill and I get a flat rate of $28 and my usage is $6. So I'm not encouraged to conserve. I conserve. So thank you so much for the presentation. And when we delay it a little bit and get a little bit of more information about what it costs, but it scares me about how few people even know what we're doing. 44 people out of a town of
Yep. And I think one of the recommendations is, item number C, is that council authorize staff to develop a communication strategy. So it's good that that's incorporated in the process as well. Great, thank you. Councillor Klopas, then Councillor Hempin, then Councillor Broom.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I know we had some time last week to go through that presentation. I noticed a few numbers have been changed, so good to see. But once again, I did want to highlight the concerns that I brought forward last week when we sat down. Maybe not concerns, but just recommendations where I do feel that even though it costs a lot for administration, we have to find a simple and cost-effective way to drive the right behavior from the residents in order to minimize the impact, but as well from the businesses themselves. So, for example, I know the new businesses or new developments that are being brought forward, they're taking storm management under consideration, and there's reviews and studies done on how to manage it properly. But I wanted to see if there's any kind of consideration or propose that we have consideration for developments that are already in place where there is tremendous amount of stormwater impact going into our sewers and taking toll on that without the amount of investment that they have to put in order to do a full study. There needs to be some kind of incentive for them to stop that and hold the water back. And when we talked about, I understand it was about a $20,000 or so impact for the business owner in order to go through the study. I want to see something that drives the right behavior without that kind of a financial impact on the business. Another suggestion that I would have is to provide, again, special consideration for situations like Councillor Kerwin has and a few of the residents in my ward have, where there is a flood on their backyard. It's not usable. It is being used as an overflow, and they need to have some kind of reflection on that itself, as opposed to put into the same bucket as everyone else.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, with the high-level runoff properties, we wanted to make sure that this was as low cost for the businesses as possible. With other municipalities that implement the runoff credit program, they require engineering studies to be done in order to have those costs done. What we're doing is that we're coupling it with the site plan agreement process. So all of this information is already done. We're not asking businesses to go do it again to provide some different numbers. We can use what's already in the site plan approval process. So that is a great innovation that we have here at the town. Yeah, so with this, we need to make sure that people are actually, like, their properties are performing the way that they're performing to give them the credit. And we can look in to see if there's other innovative ways that we can consider that, but at this point, this is what we found. We can look into greater considerations of different methods that can make sure that we're providing the credit to those who deserve it and not those who just say that they want it, type of a thing.
Just to clarify, is my point is overall is we need to make sure that through this we drive the proper proper behavior from the businesses and the residents, and there's got to be some kind of incentive to do that in a simple way, so it's not as cost prohibitive. And just wanted to throw that as a thought that we should strongly consider.
Good. Thank you. Might be something that we should commit ourselves to a 2-year review in terms of how does the behavior change and how can we improve that. So this program would be subject to a further review, I would think, over the course of maybe a couple of years. Mr. Sheldon, would that seem reasonable?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, yeah, to monitor the program and again, in keeping with our continuous improvement philosophy, to see if there are improvements that can be made.
Thank you. Councillor Hempin and then Councillor Broom.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I don't want to overcomplicate this either. I understand your approach to keeping it simple and having simple calculations to get these user fees. In principle, I do agree with what's being proposed. In my ward, I know we do have areas where we're dealing with flooding, and when we have major storm events, there are some real challenges, and people's homes are being affected, streets are being affected. So there is a need to address our concerns in the future. I want to reiterate what I said before, that I appreciate the $14 reduction to the average homeowner, but for myself, in order to support this, I need to have a better understanding of if we're revenue neutral with what's being proposed today, if we're in a deficit, and if that's the correct word to use, of $17 million, I need to have some idea of a projection of what the additional costs, if any, are going to be to the homeowner within the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever staff can provide, just so I have a level of comfort of understanding if there are going to be increases and what those numbers are going to be. So I have a good level of understanding. I do have a question in regards to the reduction of the 2.6%, which is reflected in the $1.4 million reduction in taxation, tax revenue. This council has set a direction to staff to come forward with a 2.2% increase in our taxes. I'm wondering if somebody could maybe explain that to me. If I take that 2.2 and that's the direction that was given, plus we have an infrastructure portion, but I'm going to leave that alone. But that 2.2% increase that we've asked staff to not exceed with this 2.6% decrease in the taxation and being added to a user fee, Am I correct in assuming that we're going to see a 0.4 reduction in the tax bill in the next budget?
Mr. Mays?
Based upon the council direction, that would be correct. It would be a 0.4% tax decrease prior to any infrastructure levy or any other changes that may be made to the tax levy. But based upon the target as established, that would be a tax decrease.
Thank you. I don't want to, for myself, like as I say, I do agree in principle with this, and I'm wondering if it's, I would like to support it. I think we're going in the right direction to address major weather events and dealing with stormwater management. I'm wondering how long, if maybe staff could let me know, how long it would take for them to maybe come up with some kind of projection for even 1 to 5 years, what they feel the user fee would increase, or if it wouldn't increase, some kind of projection based on that $1.7 million or somewhere around that.
Timelines, Mr. Mays?
We could, for the fees and charges coming up on November 28th, Committee of the Whole, we can endeavor to have something for that at that time to support the fee.
Okay, I'll be making a motion that we defer this decision until that date. Yes.
Okay, could I ask that we stand that down just for a minute? Because on a deferral, the only thing we can discuss is the deferral. I haven't had a chance to speak to it. I would like an opportunity to that, and I see Councillor Broom hasn't. And then maybe I'll entertain the motion after that. Is that okay with you? Okay.
100%.
Okay, good, thank you. Councillor Broom?
Thank you. I just took a moment to Google the online portal that Mississauga uses, and if there's any way that we could move in this direction, I think it would be very helpful to residents. I simply typed in an address in Mississauga. It does a Google photo of the resident's rooftop, and this particular resident is looking at an estimated annual charge of $100 a year, a daily estimation of 27 cents based on the rooftop area used is what they're using to estimate. So if there's any way that we can move in this direction, it's very simple. You simply type in your street name and the street number, and it provides this information. And then it goes further to explain how it was calculated. So if we could get there, that would be good for residents. And in terms of for myself and perhaps other members of council, I think it's important that we receive the communications strategy ahead of it going out to the residents, and all of the pieces that the residents will be seeing. Obviously, this video through YouTube is currently live, so they're seeing that. So it would be good to know what the strategy is, what the schedule, and what, in fact, the residents will be seeing prior to them seeing it would be a benefit to me and perhaps other members of council. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Now, Kevin, I spoke with Mississauga, and I believe I referred you to the planner from Mississauga, and if I recall correctly, that was, I mean, that software was great, but it was huge. I think, didn't they scan every property and calculate that? It would be interesting to see what the cost of that program is.
Yeah, so they're on the fair end of the spectrum. So the way that they do it is that they have a dedicated GIS technician go and digitize the impervious areas of all the industrial and commercial properties. And then for the residential properties, what they do is they take the roof area. This is data that they already had on hand, and then they calculate what the total they would extrapolate from that what the total impervious area is. So if you have this much roof, then you probably have this much impervious area. So they do a calculation like that, just like we're doing here in Newmarket, is that if you have this much property size, then you probably have this much impervious area. So they just get to their calculation in a very similar way.
Different assumptions. But it was quite a costly program, if I recall. But that might be helpful to find out that if we're going to have more information. Councillor Hampton?
Yes, thank you. Again, looking at the how it's simplified and how you've looked at that, I think that's a good way of dealing with it. Maybe if we could also have some information on, we all on our tax bill have I guess a square meter calculation of how big our properties are, our home properties, and business owners would have that as well as on their assessment. So if maybe we could have some kind of number that could be multiplied, the square footage by X number of square meters, I should say. So just something very simple.
Yeah, so the property tax bill is very heavily legislated to what we can actually put on there, but on the tax bill there is a square footage for residential properties. So when we pass the square meter, when we talk about square meters, we can also put by acre and by square foot, just so that residents don't need to do the conversion themselves from square meter to square foot. They can just take the square footage on their property tax bill, multiply it, and get it to there, and then.
That'd be great. If we can have you, I don't know if that's possible on the 28th. If we can have that, I guess that'd be helpful.
Okay. Or even an interim information report, if that's helpful between that. Okay. So I support the direction that this is going into, and I think what we need to remember is, if the asset is breaking down, we need to replace it. Whether or not we replace it through a general tax rate or a user fee, we still need to replace those costs, or we still need to undertake those costs. If I understand correctly, there's in the report, there's $983,000 that's currently going into the ARF program for wastewater that would be part of the funding that's provided in this new system. Is that correct, Mr. Mays? So there's close to $1 million coming out of that's going into ARF every year. That would $1 million, close to that, would be going into this utility. Is that right?
What's being proposed in the report, it was based upon, I believe it was a 5-year average of capital contributions to stormwater-related assets, and that's how that number was derived at. That is the average amount of capital spending that we've done, so that would be an appropriate starting point for capital contribution.
Okay. All right, and then we need to get a better understanding in terms of what our cash flow needs are, but distributing those costs to people who use this system more is a principle that I support, so I'd like to see us go forward with that. I think there might be some fine-tuning with respect to floodplains and maybe some of the cost of applications to gain some credits. So those are some areas that we can give some consideration to when this comes back forward to. But the reality is the assets need to be replaced, and what's the fairest way of recovering the cost of replacing those assets? And I think this is a better way than rather than in the general tax base. And I'll be looking to see that whatever we put into that rate will come out of the tax base, as I think all members of council will be looking for as well. So we need to be able to have some way to demonstrate that to our residents, because that'll be a question that'll be asked, I'm sure. Okay. If there's no further questions, then I'd like a motion to receive the presentation and to defer. Is that the motion? Okay. And that was seconded by Councillor Kermit? Okay. Any further discussion on the deferral then to the 28th?
Do we have staff about any implications? I fully support it.
Yeah.
Did staff have any comments on the timing, or is it all good?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. How's the 28th as far as coming back with that additional information? Does that work for you, Mr. Mays or Kevin? What else? What else would that impact?
They come back on the 28th.
Yep.
As you said, whatever information we can pull together at that time. I won't call it a 6-year plan, but we can do some preliminary projections in the same sort of model that we would do for that to give some idea. I'm not sure how we'll fit in the asset replacement fund contributions, but we'll work on something like that and provide you with the assumptions that we use to give a projection going forward. At that time, we can also give some examples of various properties and the specific impacts on them, properties that either have been pointed out during the discussions or ones that would be appropriate examples for the categories they're on. their end to give a little better information on that. So can we be ready for the 28th? If that's what's necessary to move this forward, we will be ready.
But is there anything else that we need to give some consideration to? Will that take something else off the schedule that we're looking forward to as well? I think that's the question.
Sorry, yeah, my simple question, we always ask about these things, I fully support the deferral, but that doesn't affect the timing in terms of we'll still hit the times of approvals you need to have this in place for next year if we decide to move forward, and that all still works?
The regional councillor is correct. Yeah, the key thing is we would have been coming forward on the 28th anyhow for the fees and charges. They wouldn't be approved till that time, okay. So that doesn't defer anything. Perhaps on the communication, it may cause us some issues on that. The budget won't be coming forward till January, but for November, we should have a pretty good handle of what the numbers are. I don't see them actually changing substantially from what we have here for the operating costs. So no, this will not, from that point of view, defer implementation. It will have no impact on the budget process.
And can I just ask, the one question you did flag there was, and not to change the motion, but just to think about how we handle that, the communications. When would residents first skip this at their doorstep, and how long would we have to communicate to them prior to that so that we could do as much as we could to help as many people understand as possible?
Well, we have the video that we could start showing at this time. We were working on a flyer. There's other things. There was a question also on the rates. There are preliminary rates actually in the report that went with this presentation. So, I mean, anyone could take those numbers and multiply by the property sizes to get a general idea.
Sorry, but what's the timeline like? How much time would we have to communicate before people would start to
see this on the bill?
Like when would they get this? So I can't recall. So we get this as part of their tax bill, right? When will residents get this on their doorstep? If we approve it, when will they get on their doorstep? And which will give us, if November 28th is approved, how much time to communicate?
Okay, so they would get that with the preliminary tax bill, which I believe goes out at the end of January? Yes.
Okay, so we'd have 2 full months to communicate, yes. December and January. Is that correct?
So the way that we developed the communication plan was that we have a website and that video and things like that, the plan was to release it, the full-fledged website once the bylaw was approved. That's put forward to you today, and so we might want to release that before the bylaw is approved if we defer this, just because we want to get that message out. And then there was other communications to businesses of that if businesses, the feedback that we got from businesses on this charge is that they don't mind the implementation of this charge. They just want to be able to budget for it. And the firmer that number is, the little bit more that they'll appreciate that number. And they'll appreciate the heads up. We could send them a letter before the bylaw is passed if we want to go in that route.
Okay, so while a little tighter, staff feel comfortable that we have the space to communicate effectively as well.
Mr. Sheldon?
I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor and members of council and staff, if we could get direction from you to perhaps commence with some sort of notification that this is being considered and a key meeting coming up is the 28th, so that the public starts to see the direction that we're moving in.
Yeah, does that need to be a recommendation or just direction? I think direction. I'll leave it to mover and seconder, but I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, good. All right, any further questions? So the question then is or the vote then is with respect to a deferral to November 28th, Committee of the Whole, with a direction for staff to begin the communications program. Okay. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And we did receive the presentation. Thank you, Kevin. A lot of work's gone into this, and it's very evident that has. So I think the only remaining item is item number 2. No, sorry, item number 4. Okay, Councillor Kerwin. And the seconder is, this is the allocation report. Councillor Twinney. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Kerwin, as the mover? Councillor Twinney? Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I believe that concludes today's agenda. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Broom, Councillor Kerwin. All those in favor? That is carried.
Linda.
I think a 30-day deferral on such a significant shift is not bad at all.
You know what, I wanted to meet with Mike and I had to cancel my stomach flu and
So
so I
maybe,
didn't have a chance to sit down with him and talk to him about it. Maybe it could have been addressed if I would have met with him before, but.
well, you know what, I think
Excuse me,
because people,
we arranged lunch in the Mullock Room thinking that the meeting would go longer if you'd like it, not to go to waste.
okay, good.
We arranged lunch.
The report covers a lot, so the presentation helps, and now the digestible, I think it's much better for us. Yep, I think so. And it's a pretty significant